Hello, today we're going to talk a little bit about Scarborough's Reading Route and the next steps for literacy instruction in Moorhead schools moving into the 22-23 school year. Before we begin, let's start with a warm opening. I want you to think for a minute about this school year. What is a practice that you use this year that you definitely need to use again next year? What's something that really worked for your kids that you don't want to forget about? Take a minute to think about that or share with a person near you. Now let's get started. Our objectives for today are to understand how the science and research has evolved over recent years related to reading. We're going to introduce Scarborough's Reading Rope and think about how the two sides of the rope create skilled reading. And we're going to also view a district PD plan for literacy for the next 2 years in order to support deeper learning for all teachers. You may have heard of this PD letters. You might know some colleagues who have already engaged or are currently engaging in this deep and intensive and comprehensive PD experience based on the sciences of reading. This is not a curriculum or a program. As I said, it's all about learning about the science behind reading. You might know some special education or title or literacy coaches or speech teachers that have been involved in this training. We want to make sure all teachers have the opportunity to learn about this deep research. What we have learned from letters is that we are trying to teach readers. And what we have done in the past is think about readers by observing their behaviors. And we call that the outside-in approach, where we've observed what teachers or what students are doing, and we've kind of inferred what was happening in their brain. But due to a collaboration with brain researchers, now our reading researchers are putting that knowledge together and thinking about what is actually happening inside the brain as or adults are reading. And by studying that brain research, we can better understand how students truly learn to read and then match our instruction as best we can. So you may have heard this term, the science of reading, but the science of reading is just that. It is science. It's this ever-changing and evolving body of research. And the impact of this research is really exciting right now because of the collaboration, like I said earlier, between brain scientists and reading researchers. In the past, those fields have just been so separate, but as they come together, we're really able to use all that scientists are learning about the reading brain and bring it into our practice. But remember, the research is moving all the time. And so we won't find that month to month, day to day, we have giant changes in what is recommended for students, but we will continue to see slight refinements of what practice can look like based on that research. Some misconceptions that we have seen is that the science of reading is like science happening in some laboratory somewhere, or is a specific curriculum that you can just go buy the science of reading, or maybe it's a science textbook, or maybe it's just a series of worksheets that I can get and then I'm teaching science of reading. Oh, some other things we have heard is that science of reading is based on one specific study. No, like I said earlier, it's based on this body of research that has been evolving over years and years. And it's not settled. As we talked about earlier, it's continuing to grow, and new research is coming out all the time that continues to refine our practice. But the research is conclusive, and it is useful for our instruction. And science of reading is not just about phonics, although there is a lot of buzz, and phonics is so important for beginning readers, but it's not only phonics. And it's certainly not at odds with the art of teaching. We're certainly not wanting any cookie cutter classrooms We're looking for classrooms that follow the science and use their own abilities to make great instruction. So the science of reading, simply put, is best practice or evidence-based practices that we know will work for lots of kids.
Let's revisit this idea of learning to read from the inside out. How can we better understand what's happening inside the brain when our students are learning to read? We know we are asking the brain to do something that it was never designed to do. Reading is a human invention. What is natural is speech. What is natural is language comprehension and hearing different sounds in our speech. Now, I'm no brain scientist, but this visual helps us understand that there are different areas that are activated in the brain as we read. When we decode, these areas act in a coordinated and synchronized way. So when trying to teach readers, we need to understand that there are different parts of the brain serving in various capacities, and they have to work together in new ways. We're born with the ability to process sounds and recognize visual information. But the act of connecting those sounds to specific visual images, such as letters, is hard brain work. Mapping those sounds to letters helps develop neural pathways, and we can help strengthen those pathways through our instruction. If we strengthen one of those areas, it strengthens the entire network as it works in that coordinated and synchronized fashion. So why is this so important? This is important because we match sounds to letters as we decode. A student who doesn't understand that a word can be broken into those sounds is not going to be able to match a letter to that sound because they don't understand the sounds. Another way of looking at this same information is looking at the listening comprehension 3-part processing on the left. This visual shows what our brain does naturally. The model on the right emphasizes how when our brain adds in that work of orthographic mapping, that things become more difficult. Reading is not a natural process. Our oral language and speech development are natural. Learning to read and write are an unnatural process. Wow, that was a lot. If you're alone, go ahead and pause the video and jot some notes and think through what's resonating with you. If you're in a room with others, take a moment to turn and have some conversation. What's sticking out to you at this particular moment?
So now let's dig into what students really need in order to be able to read. This visual here is called the simple view of reading. We know our big goal for students is to be able to read and comprehend. Reading comprehension is the big goal. In order to comprehend what they read, students really need 2 big things. They need to be able to recognize the words on the page or be able to decode each of those words quickly. They also need some oral language skills. They need to be able to recognize those words that they're saying in their head. When they read the word beach, they need to be able to understand that a beach is a place where they go swimming. And the more they know about that language, the better they'll be able to comprehend. And I think you probably can put in mind some readers you've had in your classes before. You might have had a student that can decode really well. They can call out all of those words 100% of the time, but they do not have that language to support them. So when they're reading, their comprehension is not there. Or you might have a student with really strong language skills. When they speak, they're very eloquent. When you do a read aloud, they're able to understand and speak about the book really well. But when they get a book in front of them, they struggle to be able to decode the words in front of them. That student as well would not be able to read that text with comprehension. And we also know that this simple view of reading is not an addition equation, it is a multiplication equation. meaning that if you multiply one side by another, it does affect that reading comprehension. For example, if a student can decode about 50% of the words, but understand all of them, their reading comprehension will still be at about 50%, because although they could have understood those words, they couldn't decode them. Or if they can only decode 50% but understand 50%, they're only going to comprehend about 25%. Simply put, more decoding cannot make up for a lack of language comprehension, and more language comprehension cannot make up for a lack of decoding. Students need to be strong in both areas in order to be a skilled reader. Now we're going to look at a more detailed visual of the same idea. Here we have that word recognition side, and here we have that language comprehension side. But you can see here in Scarborough's reading rope that we break down language comprehension into some specific strands that students need. And we do the same with word recognition. What are those skills that students need in order to have strong word recognition? So that top part really demonstrates what students are doing in their head as they listen or read. And that bottom part represents that word recognition, the work that they're doing to decode those words that are on the page. And you can see how the red part of the rope and the blue part of the rope weave together to create skilled reading. Again, word recognition being that ability to recognize written words correctly, the sounds, the letters, the words, putting all of it together in order to decode the words in front of them. And language comprehension is that ability to understand oral language. As they hear those words, they have the background knowledge to support them. They understand that specific vocabulary that's used within the text or spoken out loud. They understand how the sentences work. They can make connections to previous knowledge, and they can really get the gist of what they hear, either spoken aloud to them or in their head as they decode. And one really great analogy for Scarborough's reading rope is this baking a cake. And we already talked about how if you don't have language comprehension or word recognition, you're going to be sunk. But what if you're missing individual pieces within this, one of the strands? Think of each of these strands as an ingredient in the birthday cake to the left. If you are missing any one ingredient, you're still going to have a cake, but the cake's just not going to be as good. And the more pieces you're missing, or the more ingredients you're missing from your cake, the worse that cake is going to turn out. So we don't just need language comprehension in general. We need to dig into each of the strands within it. And we don't just need word recognition. We need to have all of the strands inside to help build those skilled readers. So now think back to your class that you've been working with this year. Can you think of any students who are very strong in one area or another? Maybe a student that's really strong in their language comprehension, but that word recognition is not so good. Or a student who can really decode well, but they're not understanding the language. Think for a minute about some of your students. If you're in the room with someone else, go ahead and turn and talk about the students that you see in your classroom.
So let's bridge this research to practice. What are we already doing in Moorhead Public Schools that we can celebrate and also continue to amplify and improve upon? We know that the verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge strands are the meat of our benchmark comprehension lessons that we provide to students each day. Our K-2 classrooms have been working hard to increase phonological awareness activities during their phonics instruction. We've even purchased a Haggerty tool to help support that work in our K-2 classrooms. We teach decoding during our phonics lessons and practice during our independent work time. And we help develop sight recognition from repeated practice during our phonics instruction, as well as independent work time. Next year, we will have a focus on the word recognition half of the rope. These strands will become our focus in the year ahead. We know we can continue to amplify and improve upon our current practice in this area. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the District Professional Development Plan. Moving into next year, we will have a focus on that blue part of the rope, the word recognition area, in our Tier 1 instruction. And in subsequent years, we'll move into more professional development on that red part of the rope, the language comprehension in our Tier 1 instruction. So if you'd like to get started on some summer work or provide yourself some professional development over the summer, there are 2 options listed above. There are some district-sponsored opportunities on the left. Book studies and phonics and word study curriculum are going to be offered this summer. If you're interested in these options, please watch for more information coming from Courtney Seiler. On the right-hand side, there are some other opportunities. NDSU has some summer offerings, as well as the Minnesota Letters Training. There are endless amounts of opportunities for professional development in these areas. If you're interested in some other suggestions, please reach out to your building coach or Courtney Seiler. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to the learning ahead.